My name is Caleb Warren, and I've spent most of my adult life outdoors. First as a field tech for a hydrology lab, then as a freelance photographer chasing solitude and clean light. I've slept through sleet in Utah's canyons, watched sandstorms roll over Death Valley, and hiked miles past the point where the signal bars vanish. I don't scare easily. And I don't buy into superstition. That's probably why I brushed off the old man's warning at the gas station outside Bishop when he said, "Don't camp under the blood moon tonight, son. Strange things happen in these hills." He said it without irony, just slow, quiet certainty while filling his truck. I smiled, nodded, and told him the forecast called for clear skies. He didn't smile back. The plan was simple, a 3-day solo trek into a less traveled basin off the John Muir Trail. I'd scouted the area the month before, high enough for cool nights, low enough to avoid snow. The timing happened to align with a total lunar eclipse, the so-called blood moon. I thought it'd make for beautiful night photography, rust-colored light against granite peaks. My camera gear was packed alongside the usual tent, bare canister, water filter, first aid, topo map, compass, and a GPS tracker clipped to my pack. I set out from the trailhead late morning, the sun sharp and white above the ridgeline. The first miles wound through Jeffrey pines that smelled faintly of vanilla, then opened into steep granite slabs cut by meltwater streams. By mid-afternoon, I'd gained close to 3,000 feet. The altitude made each breath a measured act. At a narrow creek crossing, I met 2 hikers coming down. They looked wind-burned and tired, the kind of fatigue that clings to the edges of your voice. We traded the usual trail talk. Conditions, snow patches, bears near the pass. When I mentioned I was heading up for the eclipse, one of them, an older woman with silver hair poking from her cap, paused. "You camping high?" she asked. "Near Long Lake, if I make it before sunset." She hesitated, then said, "Be careful up there tonight. Wind shifts strange when the moon turns red." I almost laughed, but her tone wasn't teasing, just tired, like she'd seen enough things not worth explaining. By the time I reached the lake basin, the sky was softening into gold. The place looked untouched, still water, granite domes, a few sparse pines clinging to cracks in the rock. I pitched my tent on a shelf above the lake, facing west where the full moon would rise later. The silence pressed in thick and even, broken only by the wind sliding through reeds. I cooked a small dinner, dehydrated chili, instant coffee, and noted how quickly the light drained from the slopes. The temperature dropped fast too. By the time I zipped into my tent, the stars were already spilling overhead, cold and sharp as glass. Around 9, I unzipped the flap to watch the eclipse begin. The moon's edge dimmed slowly, like someone dialing down a lamp. My breath smoked in front of me. It was quiet enough to hear the soft ripple of water far below, the faint pop of cooling rocks. Then, a sound I couldn't place, a metallic clink, like a carabiner tapping stone. I leaned out of the tent, scanning with my headlamp. Nothing but the shapes of boulders and the pale shimmer of frost forming on the grass. I told myself it was just my cookware settling or wind shifting my tripod. Still, I checked the pot lid was snug, the tripod folded beside the pack. Nothing moved. The eclipse deepened until the moon hung dull and red above the ridgeline. The reflection on the lake looked like a wound. I took a few long exposure shots, the shutter ticking softly. Every sound seemed magnified. The creak of my boots on gravel, the faint strain of nylon from the tent behind me. Halfway through a shot, something flashed across the viewfinder. I froze, blinking. I thought maybe a meteor, but the direction was wrong, horizontal, low to the ground, and quick. I lowered the camera, scanning. The terrain was open granite and sparse scrub, nowhere for anything large to hide. I waited. The air felt charged, like before a storm, though the stars were steady. Eventually, I went back to the tent. My pulse was louder than the wind. Inside, I zipped up and listened. Silence. No branches, no small animals rustling, nothing. Even the crickets had gone still. I must have drifted off sometime after midnight. When I woke, the world was washed in pale gray. The eclipse had passed, leaving the moon full and bright again. I checked my watch, 2:47 a.m. My bladder pushed me toward the cold. I unzipped the flap, stepped out barefoot onto the dirt. The air was brittle, thin with frost. That's when I noticed it. Footprint first. I thought they were mine, looping from where I'd paced earlier with the camera. But the spacing was off. Longer stride, heavier sink. They came from the direction of the lake and stopped right outside the tent. 2 prints, side by side, toes pointing inward like whoever made them had stood there for a long while. I crouched, my breath clouding over the prints. The detail was clear tread pattern from a heavy hiking boot. I wear trail runners. Adrenaline kicked in. I spun my headlamp toward the basin. Sweeping across the granite flats, the sparse pines, the faint glint of the lake, nothing, just the white silence of altitude. My mind scrambled through possibilities. A late-night hiker, maybe another camper wandering near my site. But there were no other tents, no glow of headlamps, and the nearest trail spur was miles below. I followed the tracks a few yards downhill until they vanished on rock. No prints leading away, just gone. Back at the tent, I checked my food cache. Bare canister intact, no claw marks. My tripod still stood near the ledge where I'd set it. Everything in its place. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I considered hiking down early, but descending in the dark with narrow switchbacks would be reckless. So I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting with my back to the tent wall, flashlight off, trying to slow my breathing. Dawn came gradual and colorless. When the sun finally crested, I stepped outside to check again. The prints were softer now, melting into the soil, but still visible. I took photos out of instinct, maybe proof for myself. That's when I realized something else. The prints weren't from standard hiking boots. The tread was deep, almost industrial, like the pattern on old forestry issue or maintenance gear, the kind I'd seen rangers wear decades ago in archival photos. I hadn't seen anyone dressed like that on the trail. I packed quickly. The whole morning, the basin felt different. Emptied out, air too thin, birds absent. I tried to tell myself it was lack of sleep, altitude, overactive imagination. But every few minutes, I caught the faint echo of metal on stone again, that same clink I'd heard the night before. By the time I reached the tree line, wind had picked up, whistling through deadfall. I kept moving until the terrain leveled and the first bars flickered on my phone. A voicemail waited from an unknown number, timestamped just before dawn. It lasted 10 seconds. No voice. Just the sound of breathing, slow and even. I stopped walking. The ridge above me glowed orange in morning light. Somewhere up there, the blood moon had burned itself out, leaving nothing but cold day. The message ended with that same faint metallic tap. I deleted it before I could second guess why. The first half of the descent went fast. Too fast, maybe I was half running the switchbacks. My pack bouncing against my spine, the dry needles underfoot snapping sharp in the cold morning air. The sun hadn't warmed the granite yet, so each shadowed turn felt like stepping back into night. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't stop to refill water. The prints were still behind my eyelids, perfect tread, heel to toe, stopping right where I slept. At the first creek crossing, I forced myself to slow down, kneeling by the water to splash my face. The cold burned clear through the fatigue. I drank from my filter, tried to listen for the normal forest noise, birds, insects, anything alive. But the air felt off, like a room where someone had just been talking and stopped when you entered. Around 10, I reached the edge of a meadow I'd passed on the way up. The grass was rimed with frost, and the wind pushed in slow, even breaths through the aspens. I remembered taking a photo here yesterday. Bright sky, open view of the distant peaks. Now everything seemed drained of color, the trees stiff like paper cutouts. I sat for a while, pulling out my phone to check the voicemail again, even though I'd deleted it. Empty inbox. I scrolled through my photos next, shots of the eclipse, the lake, the tank. Then I saw something that shouldn't have been there. In one of the long exposures, right at the edge of the frame, a faint human shape stood near the waterline. No face, just a dark outline. It could have been a trick of the shutter, a reflection, or me moving between shots. But I hadn't gone near the water after I set the tripod. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. Still looked like a figure, shoulders squared. Head turned toward the tent. I locked the phone and shoved it in my pocket. The rest of the trail dipped into heavier timber. Pines close enough to block most of the light. The smell of sap and rot thickened. I tried to focus on practical things, the sound of my boots, the angle of the sun, how long until I reached the lower junction. Anything but that photo. About an hour later, I came across a ranger post I hadn't noticed on the way up. A small wooden structure, half hidden behind trees. The roof sagged and the sign above the door was so faded I could only make out the first few letters. USFO. Maybe forest. It looked abandoned. The window glass was gone, and a padlock hung loose on the door. I should have kept walking, but curiosity tugged harder than caution. I stepped inside. The air was dry, heavy with dust. Old maps curled on the walls. A desk slumped against one corner, covered in water rings and mouse droppings. Behind it sat a metal chair, its back bent slightly, as if someone had leaned too hard for too long. On the desk lay a weathered logbook. I brushed off the cover. Forest Service seal, years stamped faintly 1987. I opened it. The pages were yellowed, entries scrawled in blocky handwriting. June 13, patrol through Long Basin. No sign of campfire masseuse. Strong winds tonight. Heard clinking again. Must be metal debris shifting in the rockfall. The next lines were crossed out. June 14, same sound near lake. Tracks by the tent's mine. Wind direction inconsistent. Sleep poor. My throat went dry. I turned a few pages forward. Each one grew shorter. The handwriting jagged, sometimes smeared like the writer had stopped mid-sentence. June 18. Don't camp under it. Don't. The noise isn't wind. It waits until... The rest was blank. I closed the logbook and stood very still. The only sound was the low groan of trees rubbing in the wind. I left everything as it was and backed out of the post, walking faster now, pulse tight in my ears. The trail dipped again, cutting between granite walls. The farther I went, the warmer the air grew, and with it came the faint comfort of birdsong. It almost let me breathe again. I reached the lower junction by noon. There was a small ranger station here, modern, staffed. I figured I'd check in, maybe mention the old post's condition, and get a weather update before heading to the trailhead. A man in a green uniform was sweeping the porch when I arrived. Mid-40s, sunburned face, sunglasses pushed up into his hair. His name tag read, McKean. Morning, he said, leaning on the broom. You coming down from Long Basin? Yeah, I said, and realized how hoarse my voice sounded. Champed up there last night. His expression changed slightly. Not alarmed, just calculating. Hell of a night for it. Blood moon and all. I nodded. You believe in that stuff? He shrugged. Doesn't matter if I do. A lot of folks up here do. We usually tell visitors to stay low those nights. Wind gets unpredictable, animals act strange. Some say they hear metal noises. You hear anything like that? The way he asked, half casual, half studying, made my skin prickle. Yeah, I said after a pause, something like that. And footprints outside my tent, big ones. Boot treed. Could be another hiker. He offered, though his tone didn't carry much confidence. Any sign they followed you down? Note. He tapped the broom handle lightly against the porch rail, thinking. We had a ranger stationed up there back in the 80s. Went missing during an eclipse week. They never found much. Tent was there, gear scattered. Wind was blamed, but he trailed off. You see any old buildings? An abandoned post. Logbook still inside. His jaw tightened. I'll have someone check it. You're sure it was at Long Basin? About a mile south of the lake. He nodded slowly. That fits. Something about his calm unsettled me more than panic would have. Like he already knew what I'd found. Do you still have that logbook? He asked. No, I left it. He exhaled through his nose, like that answer confirmed something. Probably for the best. You heading out today? Yeah. Good. Stay on the marked route. Don't linger near water. That last part hung in the air between us. I thanked him and started down the trail again. Half a mile later, I stopped and looked back. McKean was still on the porch, phone to his ear, watching me through the trees. By early afternoon, the temperature had climbed enough that I could shed my jacket. The world seemed to have reset. Bright sky, insects humming. No trace of the unease that had ruled the night. Still, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, every few minutes, half expecting to see someone standing where I'd just been. When I finally reached my truck at the trailhead, the lot was almost empty. A single white pickup sat 2 spaces over, unmarked but clean, idling. The driver had his arm resting out the window, tan and motionless. I couldn't see his face under the brim of his hat. I loaded my pack, slammed the tailgate, and turned the ignition. The pickup pulled out a few seconds after I did, following me down the dirt road. Maybe it was coincidence. These roads only went one way for miles. But every time I glanced in the mirror, the truck was still there, keeping distance, not overtaking. 10 miles later, we hit pavement. I slowed at the intersection toward Bishop, half hoping he'd pass. He didn't. I turned into a small diner by instinct, parked under the awning, and waited. The pickup rolled by without slowing. I watched until it vanished into heat haze. Inside, the diner smelled like coffee and frying oil. I sat by the window, ordered pancakes I didn't want, and pulled out my phone again. No signal. While I waited, I thumbed through my camera's memory card instead, replaying the shots from the lake. The dark shape by the water was still there. But now, zoomed closer on my small screen, I saw more detail. Not just a silhouette, a uniform. The color was hard to tell in the dim light, but the cut looked old-fashioned. High-collar, heavy fabric, like the photos I'd seen of Rangers from the 1980s. The waitress brought my plate, breaking the spell. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said lightly. "Just didn't sleep much." "Moon kept you up?" she asked, wiping the next table. "A lot of folks said it was too bright." I forced a smile. "Something like that." She poured coffee, the steam curling between us. "Don't camp up there during one of those again. My brother used to work trails in that area. Said weird stuff happened after eclipses. Radios cutting out, equipment going missing. One guy even got a voicemail from his own number once." I froze. "Your brother's still around?" She shook her head. "No, missing since '87. The spoon slipped from my hand, hitting the cup. The coffee rippled just slightly, like breath on water. I stayed in that booth longer than I should have. The waitress had gone back behind the counter, chatting with another customer about something ordinary. Weather, gas prices, a new trail closure up north. But I couldn't hear much past the pounding in my ears. Missing since '87. Same year on the logbook. Same section of the Sierra. I wanted to ask more, but I knew if I opened my mouth, my voice would shake. So I left cash on the table, muttered thanks, and stepped out into the harsh noon light. The road shimmered. My truck looked smaller than I remembered, like a toy set down too far from home. The white pickup was gone. Still, I checked the lot twice before getting in. Once the engine caught, I drove. No music, no radio, just the hum of tires on asphalt. My plan had been to head straight west, back toward Fresno, maybe crash in a motel. But something in me refused to leave without tying off the loose thread. The ranger, McKean, had known too much. The waitress had known the year. And there was still the matter of that voicemail. I hadn't imagined it. 10 seconds of breathing. That metallic tap at the end. So instead of turning toward the main highway, I took the smaller road that led to the district ranger station. The official one, not the outpost I'd found. Maybe they'd confirm what happened in '87, and I could stop spinning stories in my head. The building sat at the base of the foothills, a low concrete block with faded flags and a small parking area. A green Forest Service emblem hung above the door, sun bleached almost white. 2 trucks were parked out front. Neither was white. Inside smelled of pine cleaner and old paper. A woman in uniform sat behind the front desk, typing something. She looked up when I came in. "Hi there. You lost?" "No," I said. "I came down from Long Basin this morning. Talked to a ranger named McKean at the lower junction. He told me to check in." Her fingers paused on the keyboard. "McKean?" "Yeah, mid-40s maybe." "Sunglasses on his head. Said he'd send someone to inspect an abandoned post I found up there." She frowned. "We don't have anyone by that name stationed in this district." I waited for her to smirk, to realize maybe he was new or transferred. She didn't. "You sure about the name?" I nodded slowly, positive. Tag said McKean. She opened a binder, flipped a few pages. Only one McKean ever listed here was Sergeant Robert McKean. Went missing on patrol. She checked the date, June 1987. For a moment, the air in the room went still. A phone rang in a back office, muffled and unanswered. She looked up. You said you spoke to him. I wanted to say I must have read the tag wrong. That I was tired, dehydrated, anything rational. But the memory of his face, sunburned calm, watching me from that porch, was too vivid. Yeah, I said quietly. I spoke to him. Her expression softened, like she was trying to gauge if I was dangerous or just rattled. You should sit down, she said. I'll get the district lead. She disappeared through a doorway. I sat on a hard wooden bench, the kind that squeaks when you shift your weight. Through the window I could see the mountains, still hazy with snow in the upper folds. Everything about them looked solid, ancient. It was the kind of landscape that made human stories feel temporary. When she came back, another man followed. Older, broad-shouldered, gray beard trimmed short. His name patch read Carr. Warren, he asked. Yeah, Carver. District supervisor. You mind walking me through what happened? So I did, from the warning at the gas station to the eclipse to the footprints, the voicemail, the abandoned post. He listened without interrupting, except to jot something in a small notebook. When I finished, he rubbed a hand over his jaw. Long Basin's been closed to staff since '89, he said finally. Rock slides made it unstable. That old post should have been dismantled. It's still standing, I said. Apparently. What about McKean? He looked past me toward the window. Robert McKean was one of ours. Went missing during a solo patrol. We found his tent, his camera, but no body. Official line was exposure. Off the record, some rangers said they heard him on the radio weeks later. Just static and metal noise. He met my eyes. You sure you want to keep digging into this? Sometimes these mountains, they get under a person's skin. I'm sure. He nodded slowly, as if that was the wrong answer but not one he could challenge. All right. Leave your contact info. We'll send a team up there. I scribbled my number. Before I left, I hesitated. The logbook mentioned the sound. Said, don't camp under it. What's that about? Carver gave a half smile without humor. Every ranger hears a version of that story eventually. Some say it's just wind moving through old mining shafts. Others say it's the sound of loose gear shifting where a slide buried part of the trail. Either way, it happens more often during lunar events. Blood moon just adds drama. So you've heard it. Yeah, he said, turning back to his desk. Doesn't mean it's anything outside. The sun was already dropping behind the peaks. I didn't remember it being that late. I got in the truck, started the engine, and sat there for a long time before pulling onto the road. The drive toward town wound through forest and then out onto flat scrub. Shadows stretched across the pavement. My phone buzzed, service returning. A new voicemail notification flashed. Unknown number. I didn't listen to it right away. Just drove, waiting for the right stretch of open highway where nothing else moved. When I finally hit play, the truck's cabin filled with faint static, then breathing, slow. Familiar, but this time under the breathing I heard my own voice, not speaking, muttering, maybe, or sleep talking. The words were unclear, warped by the noise. Then, a metallic clink. The message ended. I pulled over hard enough to scatter gravel. The phone almost slipped from my hand. I replayed the message. Same 10 seconds. Same sound. I checked the call log. Timestamp 20 minutes ago. While I'd been inside the ranger station, I opened the truck door, stepped into the cooling air. The sky had gone bruised purple. I looked back down the empty road. No cars, no white pickup. Nothing. When I finally got back in and resumed driving, I didn't go straight home. I stopped in Bishop again, at the same gas station where the old man had warned me 2 days earlier. He was still there, sitting on a stool by the pumps, hat pulled low. He looked up when he saw me. Told you not to camp under it. I leaned against the doorframe. You know about McKean. He nodded once. Knew of him. Good man. Didn't listen either. What happens out there? He shrugged. Depends who you ask. Some say it's echo, wind hitting the valley just right. Some say time bends in those basins. I just say certain nights, the mountains remember. That's not an answer. He smiled, thin and tired. It's the only one I've got. I wanted to argue, to tell him about the voicemail, the photo, the uniform, but the look in his eyes stopped me. He'd already heard it all before, maybe from others who'd come back rattled and confused. So instead I asked, "You ever go up there yourself?" "Once," he said. "Didn't stay. Why?" He stared past me, toward the horizon where the moon would rise again soon, pale and ordinary now. Because the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. He went back to polishing the pump handle, conversation over. I got back in the truck, started the drive toward the motel strip. The town lights flickered like a mirage. For the first time, I realized I hadn't eaten since morning. My head throbbed from altitude and lack of sleep. Everything felt both too real and slightly wrong, like I was half a second out of sync with the world. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Something about it stopped me. Nothing dramatic, just delayed. My head turned a moment before the reflection followed. I blinked hard, blamed the exhaustion, the glare, anything. When the light changed, I drove straight through the intersection, too tired to think. At the motel, the clerk gave me a key without looking up. The room smelled of dust and lemon cleaner. I tossed my pack on the bed and went straight for the shower. The water came out rusty at first, then clear. I stood there until my skin felt scrubbed raw. When I came out, the phone on the nightstand was blinking. Not my cell. Motel landline, I hadn't even touched it. One new voicemail. I picked up the receiver. Pressed play, the same breathing, the same metallic tap. Then my own voice, clearer this time. "Don't look outside." Click. I froze. The curtains were drawn. The air felt charged, like static before lightning. My pulse hammered in my throat. For a long time, I didn't move. I told myself it was a prank, an echo from my own recording somehow bleeding through. But deep down, part of me recognized the cadence of my own voice in that message. Tired, frayed, and certain. Finally, I walked to the window and pulled the curtain an inch aside. Outside, across the parking lot, a white pickup sat idling under the flickering streetlight. The truck's headlights stayed off, just the soft orange wash from the streetlight flickering across the windshield. The engine idled steady, low, patient. Whoever sat inside didn't move. I let the curtain fall shut. My heart thumped in slow, uneven beats. I tried to think rationally. Maybe it's another guest. Maybe it's coincidence. But coincidences don't breathe into phones. They don't leave messages in your voice. I unplugged the motel landline first. Small, pointless act, but it felt like reclaiming some ground. The dial tone died with a pop. I picked up my cell next. No signal. Of course, it was barely 9, but the highway beyond the lot had already quieted. Just a faint hum from the occasional semi, then nothing. I sat on the bed, fully dressed, staring at the phone's dead screen. The window's thin curtain stirred slightly with each pulse of the air conditioner. Every instinct said leave. Just grab your bag, keys, and drive until the mountains were far behind. But leaving meant stepping outside, past that truck, and I wasn't sure which felt worse, confronting it or pretending it wasn't there. I checked the door latch again, then the window lock. The thin walls made every noise in the building sound, amplified footsteps from the room above, a toilet flushing down the hall, the buzz of a neon sign outside that spelled "Vacancy" in broken red letters. At some point, I must have drifted into a half-doze, sitting upright against the headboard. I woke to the sound of gravel crunching. Headlights washed across the wall, blinding white through the curtain seam. The truck had moved. Closer. I could see its silhouette now, front bumper almost level with my door. A knock followed, 3 slow raps. Not loud, just deliberate. I froze. My brain scrambled for what to say, what to do. I pictured opening the door, finding the ranger there, McKean, with that sunburned calm. Or worse, someone I didn't recognize. At another knock. "Who is it?" My voice cracked. Silence. I waited, counting breath. 10 seconds. 20. Then I grabbed the handle, braced my foot against the carpet, and cracked the door 2 inches. Empty walkway. The truck was still there, idling. Exhaust drifted faintly toward the streetlight. The driver's seat looked occupied, shape visible, head turned away. "Can I help you?" I called out. No answer. I stepped outside, keeping the door open behind me. The air smelled like oil and dry sage. I walked slowly toward the truck, heart beating in my throat. When I got close enough to see through the windshield, the cab was empty. The engine kept running, keys dangling from the ignition swinging slightly. My hand hovered near the door handle. Part of me wanted to turn the key, kill the engine, just to break the loop of sound. But another part knew touching anything would cross a line I couldn't uncross, so I stepped back. That's when the motel lights flickered once. Twice, the sign outside sputtered and died. Darkness swallowed the parking lot except for the dim glow of the truck's dashboard. A shape moved in the reflection of the glass. Behind me, not in front. I spun. Nothing. Just the dull hum of a generator somewhere distant, a single moth beating itself against the bulb above my door. When I turned back, the truck's engine had stopped. The keys hung still. I went inside, locked the door, pushed the dresser against it. My hands shook, useless with adrenaline. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to listen for footsteps or the sound of a door elsewhere in the motel. Nothing but the air conditioner's strained hum. At 10:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. One bar of service blinked alive, then vanished. But in that sliver of time, a text came through. Unknown number, check the back of your camera. I stared at it until the words blurred. The camera sat in my pack, where I'd stuffed it that morning. I unzipped the top, pulled it out, turned it over. A folded scrap of paper was wedged behind the battery door. I hadn't noticed it before, creased, yellowed, like it had been there a while, written in cramped block letters, Long Basin 6018T87. Do not camp under it, he waits when the moon turns red. The same date as the final logbook entry. The same phrasing. I read it again, slower, tracing the indent of each word like that might explain how it ended up in my gear. The handwriting looked similar to the log entries I'd seen at the outpost. Angled, deliberate, pressure heavy enough to dent the paper. I dropped it and sat back hard against the wall. My breathing had gone shallow. Someone had to have slipped it in while I slept at the basin. That meant someone had been inside the tent, close enough to touch my things. I didn't sleep at all that night. I left the lights on, the camera sitting on the desk like evidence. Every few hours I'd walk to the window, peek through the curtain. The truck never moved, but it never disappeared either. By dawn, the parking lot was empty again. The sun burned through the haze, washing the world in that same bleach color as the basin. I checked out without showering, tossed the key on the counter, and hit the road before anyone else stirred. The first hour of driving felt almost normal. Coffee from a gas station, open highway, radio static filling the silence. But once the terrain flattened into desert scrub, the unease crawled back. Every few miles, I caught a flash of white in the rearview mirror, a vehicle cresting a hill, then vanishing. The rational part of me said it was just distance, mirage, morning glare. But the part of me that had read that note didn't believe it. At Lone Pine, I pulled into a rest stop. The lot was empty except for a single vending machine humming by the bathroom wall. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to steady my thoughts. When I came back out, there was a postcard tucked under my windshield wiper. It showed Mount Whitney, bright blue sky, cheerful topography, greetings from the Sierra Nevada. On the back, in the same blocky hand, you left something behind, no signature. I looked around, nothing but heat shimmer. I got in and drove again, faster this time. By midday, I was deep into the Owens Valley, the peak shrinking in my mirrors. The phone finally picked up a signal. A flood of missed notifications hit all at once. 2 voicemails, 1 email from Carver. I played the first voicemail, just static, distant wind, and that metallic clink again. The second was from a woman. The voice was faint, like recorded from far away. Caleb, this is Deputy Ellis from Inyo County. We received your message through the ranger station. We sent a team to Long Basin this morning. There's nothing there. No post, no tent, no prints. Place looks untouched. Are you sure of the coordinates? She gave a callback number. I didn't write it down. The email from Carver came next. Subject line, R.E. McKean. Caleb, we've checked our records again. There's no active ranger file under that name in our modern system. But I found a scanned personnel form from '86 attached to a closed case file. Signature matches what you described on the logbook. I'd like to speak again when you're rested. Don't drive too far today. These mountains can play tricks on tired minds." That last sentence sat heavy. The tone wasn't dismissive. It sounded almost pleading. I drove until the sun hung low and the desert turned orange. My eyes felt like sandpaper. I stopped at a rest area off Highway 395, rolled down the windows, and sat there while warm air drifted in. For the first time since that night, I let the silence settle. It wasn't threatening now, just big, empty, human-sized fears shrink in spaces that vast. Then, faint but clear, I heard it again, metal tapping stone. Once, twice. It came from the dry creek bed a few yards away. I turned my head slowly, scanning the slope. The wind stirred dust, a loose can rolling somewhere unseen. But then another sound layered underneath, a voice, low and even, barely audible. I leaned out the window, listening. "Caleb." The name rode the air like an echo that didn't belong to any direction. I slammed the window shut, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway. My pulse didn't steady for miles. The last time I checked the mirror that evening, the sky had gone bruised again. The moon wasn't red this time, just pale and full, hanging low over the ridgeline. Still, it looked wrong. Too large, too close. I didn't stop driving until it sank behind the horizon. I woke in the driver's seat somewhere south of Lone Pine, my head pressed awkwardly against the window. Dawn had burned a pale line across the mountains. I couldn't remember pulling off the road. My phone was still in my lap, battery drained. For a few minutes, I sat there and tried to convince myself I'd imagined the voice last night, the tapping too. Sleep deprivation could twist anything. But the note in my pocket still felt real. The one that said he waits when the moon turns red. I took it out again. The paper was softer now, edges curled from sweat and handling. I turned it over, looking for something I might have missed. On the back, faint pencil marks, numbers barely visible under the creases. I angled it toward the light. 36.69 3200 185420. Coordinates, I punched them into my GPS once I had power again. The map loaded, slow, signal patchy, but the pin landed right back where I'd camped. Long Basin. That was enough to tilt everything back toward action. Fear sits heavier when you stay still. Movement feels like control, even when it isn't. By 8, I'd refueled, grabbed coffee from a roadside stand, and turned the truck north again. The clerk had asked if I was headed into the range, and when I said yes, she frowned slightly, like she'd heard that story before. "Trail's closed up there, isn't it?" "Not officially." I lied. The closer I got, the more the light changed, sharper, thinner, like the air itself didn't trust me. The mountains rose in jagged folds, indifferent as always. At the junction where asphalt turned to dirt, a sign blocked the trailhead road Arasulo, Tuas. The chain across the entrance hung loose, padlock open. Someone hadn't bothered to lock it again. I hesitated maybe 10 seconds before pushing through. The first miles climbed gradual through pines. The snowmelt had carved new channels across the road, and every so often a gust of wind carried the smell of cold rock. There were no other vehicles, no footprints in the thin dust. Just my tire tracks, threading into silence. Halfway up, I passed what was left of the old ranger post, or what should have been left. The structure was gone, completely, not collapsed or burned. Gone. The ground where it had stood was flat, bare earth, lighter in color than the surrounding dirt, as if freshly turned. I killed the engine, stepped out, crouched. The soil was packed down smooth, not weathered at all. No debris, no nails, no wood splinters. Like it had been erased. That's when the radio in the truck crackled. I hadn't even realized it was on. Static first, then faint audio, male voice, clipped and distorted. Long Basin patrol. When direction inconsistent, visibility limited. The transmission repeated once, then cut off. I climbed back in, pulse hammering. Scrolled through the channels, nothing. All blank. I shut it off and sat there breathing through clenched teeth until my hands stopped shaking. The logical explanations kept circling. Maybe someone was using the same frequency for archival recordings. Maybe the soil had been leveled for a new structure. But both ideas dissolved under the way the air felt. Too still, heavy with attention. By the time I reached the lake basin, the sun was near its zenith. The same silence met me, no insects, no birds, no wind. The tent site was undisturbed, but the footprints from that night had faded completely. I left my truck at the ridge and hiked down to the water with my camera. I needed proof. The lake was low now, edges receded from melt. I could see the rocks where I'd once set my tripod. The reflection of the sky rippled in slow, perfect loops. I took a few shots from the same angle as before, lining up the ridges in my frame. When I compared the images on screen, something small but definite was different. A shadow near the far edge of the water, same place as the figure from the original photo. I squinted across the lake. Empty granite. No movement, but the sense of being watched hit hard enough to make me turn twice. I walked the shoreline, boots scraping against pebbles, until I stood where the shadow had been. The ground dipped slightly, soft with moisture, and there, half buried in silt, was a piece of metal catching the sun. I knelt and brushed it clear. A badge. Forest Service. The name etched faintly beneath the corrosion armachine. I sat back staring. It couldn't be. 38 years of weather, snow, floods. Something like that should have rusted to nothing. But the metal looked only tarnished, not decayed. I took a photo, slipped the badge into a plastic bag, and backed away. That's when I heard it again. Clink. Soft, metallic, somewhere behind me. I turned. The sound didn't come again. The air above the lake shimmered faintly, heat haze style, even though it was barely 50 degrees. Hello. My voice bounced off the granite and came back dull, swallowed. I tried the radio again, switched it to an emergency channel. Static. Then a single burst of that same transmission from earlier, playing like a loop. Long basin patrol, one direction inconsistent. I cut it off. The sunlight had gone harsh now, flattening color. I started back up the ridge, but a weight pressed between my shoulders, the feeling of being trailed. Not footsteps exactly, more like presence moving in rhythm with my own. When I reached the truck, there were fresh prints in the dust beside my tire, big ones, boot treed. My throat closed. I drove out fast enough to throw dust in plumes behind me, barely slowing for the turns. The badge lay on the seat beside me, glinting dull silver. I wanted to toss it out the window, but some part of me needed it. The proof that at least one piece of this was real. When I reached cell range, I called the number from Deputy Ellis's voicemail. Straight to automated message. This number has been disconnected. I checked the timestamp of her message again. Sent just after noon, 20 minutes before I'd arrived at the basin. The timeline didn't fit. The next gas station was down in the valley. The attendant there was a teenager, bored, picking at his nails. I asked if there was still a sheriff's office in Bishop. He nodded. Couple blocks off Main. Why? Lost property, I said. He grinned. Everyone loses stuff up there. At the sheriff's office. The woman at the front desk looked younger than the voicemail voice had sounded. Her badge said E. Ellis. I froze halfway to the counter. Can I help you? She asked. Are you Deputy Ellis? Yeah. You called me this morning. About Long Basin. She frowned. I haven't called anyone today. I've been on desk duty since 7. I pulled out my phone, showed her the voicemail. She listened, brow furrowing. That's not me, she said after a moment. But that's my voice. She played it again. I don't remember recording this. Maybe your line got spoofed. She shook her head slowly. That's not possible on our internal system. We stood there in that bland fluorescent lobby, both of us staring at my phone like it was some small, dangerous animal. Where did you say this was? She asked. Long Basin. She exhaled. I've heard stories from my dad. He was a deputy here in the 80s. Something about a missing ranger. He used to say the radio would pick up voices days after storms, sometimes in first-person tense, like the transmissions were still happening. He thought it was some weird echo effect. Mountains bouncing signals off snowfields or something. Echoes don't predict coordinates, I said. Her gaze shifted to the plastic bag in my hand. What's that? I laid it on the counter. The badge. She bent close, reading the engraving. Her face drained of color. My dad used to talk about that name. McKean. She nodded. He was the one who went missing. We both stood silent. Outside, a semi rumbled past, shaking the window glass. She looked back at me. "If you're smart, you'll let this go. Some places they hold on to things too long." I wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. I thanked her, pocketed the badge again, and walked out. The light outside had softened to late afternoon, long shadows stretching from the street lamps. The air smelled faintly of dust and diesel. I reached the truck, opened the door, and stopped. There was a folded map on the driver's seat. My map. I hadn't left it there. A small red circle was drawn in ink right over Long Basin. Next to it, a word in block letters, Toan IHT. I sat there in the parking lot until the street lights blinked on. Map spread across my knees, red circle staring up like an accusation. Tonight. The word looked written in my own hand. I turned the paper sideways, hoping the angle would make sense of it. It didn't. I told myself what I always tell myself, facts first. Someone had broken into the truck. Someone wanted me to go back up. Either a prank or a setup, or something stranger that still fit inside reason if you pushed hard enough. But reason only carries you so far before fear starts filling the gaps. I drove to a diner on the edge of town, the kind that stays open all night but never has more than one car out front. I ordered coffee I didn't drink and tried to list every plausible explanation on a napkin. It came out thin. By the time I looked up, the waitress was watching me. Same woman from the diner 2 days ago, the one who'd mentioned her missing brother. "Back so soon," she said, setting down the pot. I blinked at her name tag, Nora. "You said your brother went missing in '87. Robert, right?" She froze mid-pour. "Well, I slid the badge bag across the counter. Found this today. Near Long Basin." She didn't touch it at first. Then she picked it up with both hands, eyes tracing the letters. Her knuckles whitened. "That's his. Your brother was Ranger McKean." She nodded slowly, still staring at the badge. "Dad told me they never found anything but his tent, not this." "Did he ever talk about hearing things? Radios, echoes, anything weird around eclipses?" Her eyes lifted to mine, sharp now. "You've been up there?" "Twice." She set the badge down like it was hot. "Then you need to leave it alone. I just want to know what's real. Some things don't care what you believe." The line was quiet matter, of fact, like she'd rehearsed it for years. "I found coordinates written on a note," I said. "Same handwriting as an old ranger log. Whoever left it circled the basin again. For tonight." Nora's jaw tightened. "That's how it starts. They make you go back. They..." She shook her head. "People see patterns, think they're chasing truth. They're just chasing noise. The basin eats that kind of need." I stared at her. "You've been there?" "When I was 16, she said. "Dad took me to help clear the site after Robert disappeared. Wind never stopped. Every sound echoed wrong, like metal dragged underwater. At night, it carried words." "What kind of words?" Her voice went flat. "My brother's name." The diner light flickered once, long enough for both of us to look toward the ceiling. When it steadied again, she pushed the badge back across the counter. "Whatever you found up there, put it down. If you don't, it'll find a way to follow you until you do." Outside, wind rattled the sign chain against its post, sharp, metallic. I left cash, walked out into the cold, and sat behind the wheel until the tremor in my hands passed. The badge lay on the seat again, dull and stubborn. I could have thrown it into the gutter right then. Should have. Instead, I started the truck. The drive out of Bishop was a blur of sodium light and long stretches of nothing. The road climbed slow through the switchbacks, and somewhere near the summit the radio came alive again. No music, just a faint voice under static. "Caleb, report when direction." I shut it off and kept climbing. When I reached the gate at the trailhead, the chain was closed this time, padlock proper. Someone had relocked it since morning. I parked on the shoulder and killed the lights. The moon hadn't risen yet. Everything felt stretched thin. I grabbed my flashlight, camera, and the badge, then started up the trail on foot. The forest swallowed sound fast. My boots sank into soft pine duff, and every step sounded too close. The beam of the light swung ahead in narrow arcs. A few minutes in, I heard it again, the clink. Not far this time. I froze, swept the beam left. Nothing but trunks and brush. I moved slower after that, stopping every 20 paces to listen. Sometimes the sound was ahead of me, sometimes behind, sometimes faintly overhead, as if bouncing from rock to rock. Halfway up, I found tire marks, fresh, deep, curving off the path toward a service road. The tracks looked like the same tread pattern as that white pickup. I followed them. The service road ended at a small clearing carved into the slope. The soil was churned up, pale and loose, like something had been recently dug or filled. In the center sat my old tent. It was upright, perfectly pitched, zipper closed. My breath came short. I circled it once, light sweeping the seams. Everything matched, same color, same patch tear near the door. But my tent was in the back of the truck. I reached for the zipper, stopped. The silence pressed in again. Then, faintly from inside the tent, a single metallic tap. I stepped back. My brain kept trying to fold this into something rational, a prank. Maybe someone had stolen my gear, duplicated it. But even that didn't hold. No footprints, no vehicle sounds. Just the windless dark. I crouched, pressed my palm against the fabric, cold. Nothing moving inside. Then the radio clipped onto my shoulder, one I hadn't touched in days, crackled on by itself. Long Basin Patrol, visibility limited. Same voice, same cadence. Then my name. Caleb Warren. Report position. I yanked the battery free. The light died. When I looked back up, the tent flap was unzipped halfway, swaying gently inside. My camera sat on the ground, lens pointed toward the opening. The display screen glowed faintly blue. It was recording. I picked it up with shaking hands, stopped the capture, and hit playback. The video began grainy, out of focus, but I recognized the angle, the tent interior, the flap. Then something stepped into frame. Boots, heavy tread. The person bent down toward the lens, face partly obscured by shadow. But the chin, the jawline, I knew them. It was me. I dropped the camera hard enough to kill the screen. The air tasted metallic, sharp like blood. I backed out of the clearing, flashlight shaking. When I hit the main trail, the first light of the moon broke over the ridge, pale, perfect, and red. Not bright, not theatrical, just wrong in its timing. The next eclipse wasn't due for months. I didn't run, but I moved fast, each turn of the trail feeling longer than the last. The tapping followed in steady rhythm until I reached the truck. The cab light flicked on when I opened the door. My pack was gone. In its place lay a ranger's logbook. The cover was damp, pages curling. I flipped it open. The handwriting was newer now, less faded. June 18, patrol through Long Basin, camp found, subject present. Wind direction inconsistent. Underneath, a line added in darker inky, June 18, 2025. Caleb Warren, account incomplete. My pulse felt like static. I slammed the book shut, shoved it on the seat, started the truck, and tore down the mountain road. At the first bend, I looked in the mirror. The moonlight flooded the trail behind me, catching the surface of the lake far below. For a split second, I saw a tent pitched there again. Mine or the other, I couldn't tell. A figure stood beside it, hand raised, as if signaling me to stop. Then the road curved, and the view disappeared. I didn't stop. I didn't look back again. By the time I reached the valley floor, dawn was barely pushing against the horizon. The highway shimmered, empty, endless. I hadn't blinked in what felt like hours. My hands shook every time I loosened my grip on the wheel. At a rest stop outside Independence, I finally pulled over. Killed the engine. Just listened. Wind against metal. Distant hum of power lines. No echoes, no clinking. The silence felt almost merciful. The logbook sat beside me, water warped, still damp from where I'd found it. I hadn't opened it since the drive down. Couldn't bring myself to. But part of me knew I couldn't throw it away either. It had my name in it. Caleb Warren. Account incomplete. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the scrubby edge of the lot. Desert air, dry, mineral heavy, tasted nothing like the high mountains. A train moved somewhere beyond the valley, low and steady. The thought hit me suddenly, simple as gravity. If I just keep driving south, this ends. That's what normal people do. They cut their losses, let their ghosts stay where they belong. But normal felt like a word for someone else now. Every mile away from the basin only widened the split between what I knew and what I couldn't explain. I sat on the curb, watching the sunrise bleed through thin clouds. Pulled out the badge from my pocket, McKean's badge, and set it beside the logbook. The metal caught the early light, dull gold. A truck pulled into the lot, an old blue Ford with a Forest Service decal. The driver climbed out, stretching his shoulders. Khaki uniform, beard, clipboard under one arm. He saw me, nodded polite. "You all right there?" he called. "Yeah," I said. "Just tired." He walked closer. "Long night. Long week." He smiled faintly, glanced at the badge on the hood. "That's old issue. Found it in Long Basin." His brow furrowed. "That area's off limits right now." "I know. I didn't plan to go back." He studied me for a moment. "You Caleb Warren?" I felt the name hit like a shove. "Yeah." He lifted the clipboard slightly. "Carver asked me to look for you. Said you'd probably come down through here." Relief flickered. "You work for him. New hire," he said. "Seasonal. Covering the East District." Something about that made me uneasy. The phrasing, maybe, or the tone. Did Carver say what he wanted? The ranger looked at the horizon, then back. "Just to check if you made it out safe." His gaze dropped to the passenger seat, where the logbook rested. "You bring that down." I nodded slowly. He reached for it. "I'll take it from here." I hesitated. "It has my name in it." "I know," he said gently. "That's why it needs to stay with us." For a long time I didn't move. The air between us hung still. Then I passed him the logbook. He tucked it under the clipboard without looking inside. "What about the badge?" I asked. "Keep it," he said. "It's yours now." Something in my chest went cold. "What do you mean?" But he'd already started back toward his truck. "Safe travels, Mr. Warren," he said over his shoulder. "Try not to drive at night." The Ford pulled away, tires crunching gravel. I stood there long after it disappeared, the silence sealing itself shut again. When I got back in my truck, I noticed the clipboard, shaped dust mark on the passenger seat where the logbook had been. Clean outline. Too clean. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Gas stations, sun glare, stretches of desert that looked identical no matter how far I drove. I stopped for lunch in Ridgecrest but couldn't eat. The waitress asked if I was heading north or south. I said neither. At a rest stop near Mojave, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then curiosity cracked whatever was left of caution. I answered. Static first, then breathing, then a voice. Faint but distinct. "Caleb, it's Carver. You said you found a logbook." I froze. "You sent a ranger to get it this morning." "What ranger?" "New hire. East District. Drove a blue Ford with your district decal." "I don't have any new hires," Carver said, "and all our trucks are white." For a second, all I could hear was the wind through the open window. "Where are you now?" he asked. I looked at the sign up ahead. Highway 14 South, Mojave Desert. "Heading south," I said. "Good," he said. "Keep going. Don't stop until you're clear of the range." The line went dead. I threw the phone on the seat and kept driving. Every instinct screamed not to look in the mirror, but the longer I resisted, the harder it pulled. When I finally gave in, the reflection showed nothing but heat, shimmer, and sky. By dusk, I'd put 200 miles between myself and the Sierra Nevada. The land flattened into low desert, creosote and sand. I found a motel off the highway, a squat, sun-faded place with a single row of doors. Inside, the air smelled of dust and lemon cleaner again, just like the last one. The repetition hit too exact, like a pattern repeating itself. I showered, left the badge on the nightstand, and tried to sleep. Couldn't. Around midnight, I turned on the TV for noise. Static greeted me on every channel until one finally resolved into an old local news segment. The banner read, "Ranger still missing 1987. Photo of Robert McKean, younger than I'd imagined. Behind him, the same lake, same slope." The anchor's voice crackled. "Search efforts continue in the Long Basin area after Ranger McKean failed to return from his solo patrol during last night's lunar eclipse." Then the screen glitched. For a fraction of a second, the photo changed. My own face overlaid where McKean's had been. The sound cut out completely. I switched off the TV. The silence came back thick and close. Outside, a truck rolled past. Not fast, steady, deliberate. I went to the curtain, pulled it back an inch. White pickup, no decals. Same shape, same hum. It drove by without slowing. Still, I watched until the taillights dissolved into red pinpoints. When I turned around, the badge was gone from the nightstand. In its place lay a scrap of paper torn from the logbook. New ink, darker handwriting, wind direction inconsistent. Visibility limited. The line ended in a space, like the next word was still being written. I left the motel before sunrise, didn't check out, didn't take the highway either. I drove until the land turned empty again. Sand, rock, horizon. Somewhere near Barstow, the truck sputtered, gas low. I pulled off onto a dirt road and let it coast to a stop. I sat there watching the light change. The moon hung pale in the morning sky, washed out white, harmless. I thought about McKean, about Nora polishing her coffee pot in the dim diner light, about Carver's voice cracking under static, about all the versions of me left standing in those mountains, staring back. I opened the glove box. The badge was there again, clean, polished. I turned it over once in my hand. The back bore a new line, etched shallow but fresh, long basin patrol active, no date. I set it face down on the dash and started walking. The desert swallowed the sound of my steps fast, just the crunch of gravel, the thin whistle of heat rising. Every so often, the breeze shifted, carrying a faint metallic note, almost like memory. When I looked back, the truck was already smaller, color blending into the sand. Maybe this is what it means to leave something behind, not to escape it, but to walk far enough that the silence stops following your name. Or maybe it just waits for the next blood moon.